Welcome to our deep dive, and today we're going to be looking at the book of Numbers, chapters 12 through 14, and we're going to uncover some pretty amazing stories about humility, doubt, and the consequences that follow those things. So imagine a land so fertile that a single cluster of grapes needs two people to carry it. I mean, that's the promised land that the Israelites are heading towards after their exodus from Egypt. But as you'll see, their journey takes a few detours, thanks to some, let's say, interesting decisions. So we're going to examine how these ancient stories offer insights for navigating challenges and making decisions in our own lives today. Our first stop takes us to Numbers chapter 12, where we encounter a family feud on an epic scale.
Yeah, this isn't just your average sibling squabble. This is a direct challenge to God's chosen leader, Moses. Miriam and Aaron, Moses' own sister and brother, criticize his leadership, particularly his marriage to a Cushite woman.
Jealousy seems like a classic case, right?
Yeah, it goes beyond that, though. They challenge Moses' authority by asking, has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Hasn't he also spoken through us? Essentially, they're questioning God's appointed order. And you see in this story, it has repercussions.
And that's where things take a fascinating turn. God doesn't let this slide. He calls them out directly, emphasizing that his communication with Moses is unique. God speaks with Moses face to face, unlike any other prophet. And that's not all. Miriam is suddenly struck with leprosy. For a modern audience, it's important to understand that leprosy then. It wasn't just a physical ailment. It carried immense social stigma and isolation. Much like some serious illnesses do today, it was a visible and terrifying consequence of challenging God's order.
Exactly. It's a stark reminder of the weight of challenging God's chosen leader.
And what a wake-up call it is. Aaron, seeing his sister afflicted, immediately humbles himself and begs Moses, calling him my Lord, to intercede for her.
The raw emotion here is just palpable. It really is. And Moses' response is equally compelling. He prays fervently for Miriam's healing, showing compassion and highlighting his role as a mediator between God and the people. And God in his mercy hears Moses' prayer. However, Miriam still endures 7 days of isolation outside the camp. It's a public consequence for her actions.
And this focus on obedience also plays a role in our next story. Let's move on to Numbers chapter 13. Now we see the Israelites on the verge of entering the promised land. But as we'll find out, things take a detour when fear and doubt enter the picture. Remember that image of the giant grapes? Well, that comes from the report brought back by the 12 spies sent to scout out the land.
Right. Their reports paint two very different pictures. 10 of the spies fixate on the obstacles. They describe fortified cities and formidable inhabitants, particularly the descendants of Anak, who they depict as giants.
Yeah, their fear was so intense that they describe themselves as grasshoppers compared to these giants. Ouch. Talk about feeling small.
Precisely. Their fear magnified the challenge, making it seem impossible to overcome. However, two of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, have a completely different take. They focus on God's promise and the Israelites' ability to overcome any obstacle with God's help. They even urge the people to go up at once and take possession, showing real courage and confidence.
It's incredible how two groups of people can experience the same thing and come away with such different perspectives. But sadly, their voices are drowned out by a wave of fear. And that's where we see the truly destructive nature of doubt take root.
And that takes us to Numbers 14, where the consequences of that doubt unfold. This is where things get heartbreaking.
The Israelites, blinded by fear, completely lose sight of God's faithfulness and provision. They start grumbling and complaining, even wishing they had died in Egypt or in the wilderness. It's almost unbelievable. They go from celebrating their freedom to longing for their old captivity. What do you think was going through their minds?
It's a potent example of how quickly negativity can spread. Their lack of gratitude and faith enrages God. He even threatens to wipe them out and start over. With only Moses, this moment is a turning point in their journey.
Thankfully, Moses steps in as an intercessor, pleading for God's mercy. He reminds God of his covenant with the people, of his promises and his reputation.
It's a powerful illustration of the importance of prayer, especially when facing a crisis. Moses' faith, it never wavered, even when surrounded by doubt and despair.
And God, moved by Moses' heartfelt plea, relents. But as you'll see, there are still consequences.
The consequences are indeed severe. The generation that doubted God's promise is sentenced to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, a year for each day they spent scouting the land. Only Joshua and Caleb and those younger than them are allowed to enter the promised land.
A harsh but necessary lesson. It underscores the weight of their disobedience and lack of faith.
And there's more. Ignoring God's clear instructions not to attack. The Israelites, in a moment of impulsive defiance, try to conquer the land on their own. It seems they haven't learned from their past mistakes.
Wow, talk about missing the point. It's like they learned nothing from the previous experience.
Their attempt ends in disastrous defeat. This reinforces the message that delayed obedience is still disobedience, and trying to force open a door that God has closed will only lead to pain and setbacks.
So this is just the beginning. What started as a simple family feud has spiraled into a crisis of faith. We've seen jealousy and pride lead to punishment, and fear and doubt cripple an entire generation. We've also witnessed the vital role of intercession in mitigating God's wrath. What are your thoughts so far? You know these stories and Numbers, they're so rich with meaning. It's tempting to read them and think, oh, those silly Israelites, they just never learn. But you and I both know it's much more complex than that, right?
Yeah, I agree. It's not like we're immune to those same patterns of behavior, even today.
Yeah.
We all let fear or doubt hold us back from pursuing a dream or taking a chance every now and then.
Right. These stories are so relevant because they reflect our own human nature. The Israelites' journey is like a mirror, reflecting our own spiritual journeys. Something I'm curious about is the fact that only Joshua and Caleb got to enter the promised land. Does that seem unfair to the rest of the Israelites?
That's a thought-provoking question.
No.
It's easy to view it as punishment. But if we consider the bigger picture, it speaks to God's faithfulness to his promises. He promised Abraham that his descendants would inherit the land. And even though an entire generation faltered, God stayed true to his word.
So even the older generation didn't physically step foot in the promised land, they still experienced God's power and provision?
During their wilderness wanderings, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. They witnessed miracles like manna from heaven and water from a rock. They were protected and guided by God. It wasn't a complete abandonment. They were still part of God's plan, even if it wasn't the outcome they originally anticipated.
That makes sense. It's as if God was giving the younger generation a clean slate, a chance to build a new foundation based on faith and trust.
Exactly. And for us too. It's a reminder that God's plans sometimes unfold in unexpected ways. We may not always grasp his timing or his methods, but we can trust that he is always working for our good.
So to avoid becoming grasshoppers ourselves, what are some practical takeaways from these stories? How can we apply these lessons to our own lives? Let's say we're all facing our own personal giants, be it career changes, relationship issues, or just navigating the uncertainties of life.
Well, the first step is recognizing those grasshopper tendencies. In our own lives, ask yourself, where does fear or doubt hold me back? When do I struggle to trust God's promises? What are my giants?
Once you've identified those giants, the next step is to challenge the negative thoughts and beliefs that feed those fears.
Right. Instead of focusing on the size of the problem, concentrate on how big and powerful God is. Remind yourself of his faithfulness in the past and his promises for the future.
And remember, just like Aaron turned to Moses for intercession, we too can turn to God in prayer, to trusted friends or mentors, or even to professional counselors. We don't have to face challenges alone. There's strength in seeking support.
It shows wisdom and strength to acknowledge we don't have all the answers. We're designed for connection and support.
Absolutely. And just like God forgave the Israelites and continued to guide them, his grace is available to us, even when we make mistakes or stumble.
It's never too late to get back on track, to turn back to him and seek his guidance. He's always waiting to welcome us back.
So, Murray, thinking about the stories of Miriam, Aaron, and the Israelites, what stands out to you? What resonates with your own experiences?
What strikes me is how much their experiences mirror the challenges we face today. The temptation to compare ourselves to others, the fear that paralyzes us, the struggle to trust God's plan even when it doesn't make sense. These are timeless struggles that connect us to those who came before us.
It's a powerful reminder that we're not alone in our struggles and that there's hope, even when we feel lost and overwhelmed. These stories and Numbers encourage us to cultivate humility, to shift our perspective, and choose faith over fear. They remind us of the importance of prayer and seeking support from others.
And perhaps most importantly, they highlight God's unwavering love and faithfulness, even when we falter.
But there's another layer to these stories that we haven't touched on yet, and it has to do with the concept of God's appointed order, which was questioned by Miriam and Aaron.
That's an important point. The idea of God's appointed order was central to the ancient Israelite understanding of the world. It encompassed everything from leadership structures within their community to their relationship with God. Challenging that order, as Miriam and Aaron did, was seen as a direct affront to God's authority.
So how does this concept of appointed order translate to our lives today?
Well, while we may not live in a theocracy like the ancient Israelites did, The principle of respecting authority is still relevant. It's about recognizing that there are structures and systems in place, be it in our families, workplaces, or communities, that are designed to maintain order and promote the common good.
Of course, that doesn't mean we blindly follow any and all authority. Discernment is key. But it does encourage us to consider how our actions might impact others, and to approach those in positions of authority with respect, even when we disagree.
Precisely. And it reminds us that true leadership, like Moses demonstrated, is rooted in humility and service.
So in a way, respecting God's appointed order isn't just about following rules, it's about fostering a spirit of cooperation and seeking the well-being of the community as a whole. Something to think about.
Absolutely. And it brings us back to that crucial theme of humility, which runs throughout these stories. Recognizing our place within a larger order, acknowledging our limitations, and submitting to a power greater than ourselves.
These are powerful concepts that challenge us to examine our own attitudes and behaviors. Where in our own lives might we be struggling with pride or a lack of respect for authority?
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in those what-if anxieties and let fear kind of take over. But these stories remind us that God is bigger than our fears. And He always keeps His promises.
It's never too late to turn things around, to turn back to Him and ask for guidance. He's always ready to welcome us back. As we wrap up our exploration of Numbers chapters 12 through 14, I hope you're leaving with a sense of hope and a deeper understanding of God's constant love and faithfulness.
Remember, you're not a grasshopper. You are a child of God, equipped with His strength and guided by His Spirit. You have the power to overcome any obstacle and achieve anything He calls you to do.
So go out there and conquer those giants, knowing that God is with you every step of the way. You know what really stood out to me in these chapters was how much the Israelites' choices had consequences, not just for themselves, but for generations to come.
Yeah, it's a sobering reminder that our actions have a ripple effect. What we do today can impact not only our own lives, but the lives of those around us, and even those who come after us.
So it's not just about avoiding personal punishment, right? It's about making choices that align with God's plan for our lives and ultimately contribute to the well-being of our communities and future generations.
Precisely. And it ties back to the idea of God's appointed order. When we respect that order, when we seek to live in harmony with God's principles, we create a foundation for blessing and flourishing. But when we rebel against that order, when we choose our own way over God's way, we invite chaos and consequences that can extend far beyond ourselves.
It makes you wonder, if we were in the Israelites' shoes, knowing what we know now, would we have made different choices? Would we have trusted God more fully? Would we have stood up for what was right, even when it was unpopular?
Those are questions worth pondering. And perhaps they're not just about judging the Israelites, but about reflecting on our own lives. Where are we tempted to doubt God's goodness or His plan? Where are we allowing fear to dictate our choices?
Maybe this deep dive into Numbers is an invitation for all of us to take a step back and evaluate our own journeys. Are we walking in faith and obedience? Are we contributing to God's purposes in the world? These are challenging questions, but they're the kind of questions that can lead to real growth and transformation.
And, ultimately, they point us back to the heart of God, a God who loves us deeply, who longs for us to experience His best, and who is always ready to guide us even when we stray.
So let's leave this deep dive with a commitment to seek God's guidance in every decision we make, to trust His promises, and to live in a way that honors His appointed order. Because in doing so, we not only find peace and fulfillment for ourselves, but we also contribute to a legacy of blessing for generations to come.
Until next time.